Thanks, Andy. Hey, welcome everybody to the What's Hot, What's Not event from WCA. This is our 21st annual What's Hot, What's Not VC and M&A panel. This year, we're going to focus on does it make sense to invest in the Industrial IoT market segment? My name is Jeremy Toll. I'm the Vice President for WCA, and there's my contact information on the slide. WCA was founded in 1994 as a wireless communication alliance. It's a nonprofit business league dedicated to providing education, awareness, connection, and community to the wireless industry. We have a very active board with Peter Walter as the president, Tom Hunt's the treasurer, Tom Mitchell, secretary, Jeff Yen, Tom Rao, our directors, and Christine Courtois is our super admin, and Armand does all of our Marcom. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Asville, CIG, Google, Volar, ETI, SensorWorks, Energis, IoT Nation, Mobile Experts, and Sensitel. We are a nonprofit organization, so all of this is done via corporate sponsorships and event sponsorships. So if you find this interesting, we'd love to talk with you about additional sponsorship opportunities. We're almost there. Some housekeeping items for this event. We're going to use the Zoom comment section for your questions, and we encourage as many questions as possible. This is a panel discussion, so the moderator will be monitoring the chat box as well as myself. The presentations and recordings of this event will be available on our website, wca.org, for within 48 hours. I'm sorry, 48 hours. And we'd like to say greetings to the world and thanks for being our guest. And I'd like to put a special greetings out to my mother on the East Coast and say hi to people in over in Asia and Japan, some of my company's members. And our entertainment today is brought to you by the Midnight Ramblers. You heard a sampling of that, and there's a website URL there for them in case you're interested in booking them at some point. And that's a picture of quarantine Midnight Ramblers. So we have a few exciting upcoming events. In December, we just added a new one called Moving People and Things Safely in the COVID Era. That's going to be mid-December. And another flagship event for us, Spectrum 2021, What's Happening. This, I believe, is the fourth, maybe fifth year for that. So it's a very popular event. And then in February, we're going to do one on 6G for 110 gigahertz and above, I should say gigahertz. And that will include a virtual book signing event with Marty Cooper, who's the engineer that created the first cell phone call many years ago. So that should be very interesting. So I'd like to say thank you. And I'd like to hand this over to Mitchell Goldner from IoT Nation. He'll share a couple of slides with you. Mitchell.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Peter and the WCA. We've had a great collaboration with you guys over the last several months, and hope that continues. So IoT Nation's mission is to accelerate the Internet of Things industry through information. We aggregate data from thousands of sources and then map the IoT ecosystem in order to help IoT-related companies scale. We have continuously updated metrics on more than 25,000 companies. And what I'd like to do is just share with you a couple of views into that data. So there are really two aspects to what we do. The first part is the community aspect, which is free content on our site. And you can search for events, for example. We collect all sorts of webinars happening around the industry around the world. And then, for example, if you go into this IoT Security Foundation event, you can get a discount code. So if you are on the site, there's a discount code for that conference. That's one use. And then we also have use cases. So we aggregate use cases of all kinds of IoT-related use cases, which you can search and find ones that are applicable for you. We then have a map. The map is fully interactive. You can find companies on the map, and then every pin is then connected to a profile of that company. So it's a way of visually looking for companies. And then as part of and if your company is not already on the map, you can literally put your company on the map. So there's a button to add content, and you just add company here, and we'll add you. As far as the subscription part, there's IoT Ace Pro, and here's an example. I'll show you an example of one profile. We have profiles on thousands of companies, and as you can see here, we have general information about the company, but then we tag companies with an IoT view. So we're kind of looking at the world through an IoT lens. And so we tag companies with verticals and their technologies, and everything you see here is fully searchable. We then look at various industry activity metrics, such as the industry groups which the company is a member of or a founder of. We look at conferences which the company sponsors or exhibits at. And then we look at corporate ecosystems. These are partners in the industry. And we use that in conjunction with social media, which we analyze in order to give each company a score in terms of their IoT activity. So we score and rank companies based on their IoT activity. We then have financial information as well on companies, as well as Twitter, which gives some latest information on the company. All of that information is searchable, and I'm going to give everyone a code that you can try this out for 30 days, and I'm going to put that up on the screen right now. So the code is WCA 500. And if you have any questions, my email, I'll put it in the chat box, is mitchell@iotnation.com. Glad to answer any questions and be of help to anybody in the WCA. Thank you very much, Jeremy, and back to you.
Thanks, Mitchell. I appreciate it. Okay. Okay, so now let's start with the main event on this 21st annual What's Hot, What's Not. I'd like to hand the floor over to Lisa Oshima, who's the founder and managing consultant for Socialize Mobilize. She's our moderator, and Lisa, take it away.
Great, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Jeremy, for inviting me to host yet again. This is the WCA's 21st annual What's Hot and What's Not VC and M&A panel, and I've been privileged enough to moderate for the last several years. Just by way of introduction, for nearly 20 years, I've been a consultant here in Silicon Valley, specializing in business development, strategy, and growth for emerging tech startups. So I help companies leverage partnerships, establish product market fit, and evaluate new markets as well as grow. Today's panel is all about a really exciting and hot area of technology. It's the world of Industrial IoT. It's Industrial Internet of Things. As many of you may know, in 2017, the forecast predicted that IoT spending would grow at double-digit numbers by until at least 2020. And by 2021, more than 50% of spending on IoT projects would be for software and services. Yet specific industries, and within these industries, specific IoT use cases clearly stick out. Industrial IoT really leads the way as one of those. Manufacturing, operations, freight monitoring, smart grid, smart home, telematics, all are use cases for IoT where spending remains high, and it looks like it's going to increase in the coming years. I'm joined today by an esteemed panel of guests who are really some of the most knowledgeable folks in Industrial IoT here in the Valley. Those of you who have attended in the past may recognize Tricia Solinaro from Woodside Capital Partners. We also have a couple of new faces that you may not recognize, Richard Curtin and Jack Goody. So what I'd like to do is have each of you guys introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about who you are, how you know anything about Industrial IoT and your company, and then from there we can get started with the conversation. So starting with Tricia, I'll take the floor from here.
Sure. So my name is Tricia Solinaro. I'm a managing partner at Woodside Capital Partners. I like to say, despite the name, we're not in Woodside anymore, clearly now, and we don't have capital. But what we do is we're an M&A advisor to tech companies. And, we have a number of sectors across our firm. About 70% of our business is probably sell-side M&A. We have specific industry reports in and around this space. So we have a Industrial IoT report coming out here in the next couple of weeks. Personally, I have done over 100 deals in technology, from 10 million up to about 2 billion in consideration. And, I'm active in this space.
Great. Thank you, Tricia. Let's go to Richard.
Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Curtin. I'm a managing partner at Silicon Catalyst, the incubator. It's for early stage semiconductor companies. And I'm also, the other hat I have is in charge of business operations for the Silicon Catalyst Angels organization, which is a member-run accredited investor angel investment group. So thanks for joining today.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Jack. You're on mute, Jack.
I am on mute and just unmuted. Hello, everybody. Thanks for attending. Yeah, my background is I'm both come at IoT from two angles. On the investment side, I am a member of both Sandhill Angels and the Benef Angels. At the Benef Angels, I also run, along with a colleague, the venture capital SIG, which foster relationship and deal exchange between selected venture capitals and the Benef Angels. Those two organizations are one of the, both of them largest organization of Angel, with anywhere from 150 to 200 members. So that's, on that side. I am also the CEO of NewMem, a leader in smart compute memory based on MRAM. So very much well adapted for those kind of applications, where IoT and industrial IoT, as well as other IoT and AI applications. And I will maybe talk a little bit, there's blurring line there. And prior to that, I was CEO of Tensilica, where we did a lot of IoT, audio processing, vision AI, and high-speed communication, wireless communication. All of this in terms of IP cores.
Great. Thank you, Jack. So for those of you in attendance, thank you for joining us virtually this year. It's kind of a different year than past years, obviously, for us. This has normally been an in-person session. And so what we're going to do is a little bit different in terms of asking questions. Normally, we will have the session open at the end for questions in person, but today, given we're all on Zoom together, we're going to do questions via the group chat. So I have a bunch of questions queued up for the panelists here. If any of you have questions along the way, please feel free to type them into the message chat for everybody to see, and we will triage those questions as they come. It may be towards the end that we start looking through those questions, but bear with us here. We'll try to get to your question. So most of the people who are in attendance today are WCA members, which means you guys are very interested in wireless and wireless technologies. So I guess we'll kick things off today by talking really broadly about what's hot and what's not in wireless technologies that are relevant to the world of industrial IoT. So for our panelists, anyone who wants to answer, feel free to chime in here. What are some of the emerging trends you're seeing from a wireless perspective in industrial IoT? Be it new technologies that have kind of come into play over the last year or so, or things that you're seeing in terms of, things that are on the decline.
Sure, happy to frame that just a little bit, Lisa. I mean, I think we're seeing certainly all of those technologies that we have talked about at previous meetings, like 5G. We're talking about, edge compute technologies and security. And the funny thing is that in some respects, the pandemic has accelerated the use case for a number of these technologies. And so it's highlighted both the things that we thought would work and the things that we thought, might not work as part of this. And so we're seeing a huge uptick in deals around certainly Industrial IoT, 42 deals, which, maps to this last quarter, which maps to a year ago, right? So, a normalized to be a good rate of transaction volume at, somewhat lower deal, aggregate size amounts. But all of those edge technologies, the security angle, how do we securitize industrial IoT? Certainly, very much at play and of interest right now.
That's great. In terms of edge, you talk about edge. Can you clarify just what specifically you mean by that in terms of deals? There's certainly two ways of looking at edge. One is on the network edge, and then one is on the device edge.
So a bit of both, I guess, is the best way. We're seeing more interest in, the device edge and the sensor market, but we're also seeing, how does that interface with the network? How do we understand and manage those devices? And so, those have been the technologies that we've seen kind of move to the forefront in terms of, investor interest, and also with the M&A side.
Anything you're particularly surprised by? Something you thought maybe a few years ago was going to be super hot and has just kind of fizzled a little bit?
Probably A to X. I haven't seen as much on the automotive technology and, figuring out how do we get kind of a unified look at automotive. You could always throw 5G on a list, whether that's good or bad, in terms of what your expectations were. But I think those are probably the two that maybe stand out.
How about the rest of you, Jack, Richard? Thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to say one thing that I think a lot of the market has got so much attention on the 5G and the infrastructure to go make it work. But the other end of the equation, which is, where the rubber meets the road, which is industrial IoT, is really defined by thousands and thousands of things that need to be basically working wherever you are. And so you think about 5G, it's really an infrastructure play, but you forget about all the needs of industrial IoT, which is scale, range, basically security, as well as being able to take the bandwidth. The phrase at the IoT industrial side is the digital twin. And one thing that the IEEE has done has actually basically centered around a new IEEE standard for 802.11, which is 802.11AH, which is acronym of HALO, high availability, low power, long range. And so you come back and you say industrial IoT really needs the solution that covers the range, working through obstructions. One of the biggest issues with 5G is the range, and then having to deal with the deployments. But if you look at it on the industrial floor of all these sensors, of thousands and thousands of sensors, you need the bandwidth, especially for the digital twin. And so I think you're going to see a lot more in the market in the coming year as 802.11AH really starts to get traction.
Jack, do you have any thoughts on this one? You're on mute. I think we lost Jack again.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I would echo that. Basically, the pipes are bigger, and so it's definitely something that can be leveraged. But there is, as we know, and as we are all living it today by doing more remote things, that and we're just seeing it here, communication can be iffy sometime. And if you're talking about some light conversation, that might be okay. But if you're talking about an industrial IoT application, you may have some life-threatening situation if an equipment goes off. And so the ability to have some autonomy locally becomes more and more critical. And it serves both as a purpose of compliance and in terms of intermittent connection, but also limiting the power. The power footprint of the communication is just humongous. And so that's, people are working arduously on that. It's not a simple problem. It's simple to say intelligent node. It's more difficult to have it at the right footprint and with the right level of moldability for the different applications. So, you know, both the communication side is important. At any time, especially you're going wireless is very convenient, but you know, has this this issue of being impaired by obstacles and distances. But you know, the other side of the equation, as Richard pointed out, is definitely this capability to have some autonomy. The other part of the intelligence, when a lot of people talk about intelligence in terms of, okay, that helps to do the processing and stuff. And then they talk about security. What can we do to help on the security side, because it's a wireless transmission and can be tapped on. But actually both of them work together. The more processing you have, the better you're able to locally defend against security threat. And you know, I presented a paper last week on a NASA program, and they're very big on that. And it's the same for industrial, where they have the capability to analyze threats locally and be able to defend against those threats.
So if you guys look at your crystal ball, how do you think this will evolve? I mean, Richard's mentioned Halo, and there's certainly a lot of really interesting wireless technologies out there that are involved in industrial IoT. Is there anything that stands out for the group here as to what we should be looking for this year and in the years to come?
I'm going to start with what not to look for, because I've seen a lot of that. And, you know, on the investment side, also, and Richard be interested, and Tricia, your take on this. I still see, especially in the industrial side, a lot of custom solution. Oh, I have a better way of doing, you know, this wireless communication. It's more robust, it's lower power, and it goes for, you know, any kind of industrial applications. And it seems like a difficult proposition, because it's not so much the design of it, but the interoperability. And so having custom solution for like water leaks or any kind of other application seems a difficult proposition.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, clearly the device level between sensors, actuators, and just overall, you know, tags that might be out there. The real question is, how do you communicate and how do you effectively provide the bandwidth that's required? Never mind the range. The other thing that we're seeing in our incubator is a number of companies that we have that are focused on not only the infrastructure for 5G, but also on the other side, which is the edge inferencing engines, about all the intelligence that's going to be on the edge, and there'll be local inferencing. But then what do you do with that, right? Is it a beacon? Is it a notion of where are these assets, or where is the objects that we need to track, or what's the state of it, even in terms of predictive maintenance on some of these industrial control systems?
That's a huge issue, particularly in areas, industrial IoT use cases where there's low bandwidth in general, right? So, you know, construction or heavy machinery areas or remote locations like oil and gas. So are you guys seeing anything interesting in the way of investments or exits in those areas that help, you know, kind of figure out how to get the data once inferencing has occurred at the edge, getting that data back to where it needs to go in order to make the system smarter and to really automate some of these devices and systems?
Well, there's quite a movement now. I think people have heard of the tiny ML, tiny machine learning. And it really is a couple of key components there, right? There's the sensor actuator, there's the communication mechanism, and then there's the intelligence. What am I seeing? What should I do with it? And so that's an enormous opportunity in the market. I mean, there's a whole slew of new companies just working on sensors. And then the question is, all right, if there's thousands of them out there, how am I going to manage them? How am I going to provision them? How am I going to update them? And by the way, does it work in this industrial complex, which has lots of structures in the way? And, you know, wireless communication sometimes falls down from that standpoint.
Tricia, what are you seeing in terms of the companies, the big companies, the large companies in these spaces, like you know, NVIDIA or other big organizations that are working in these spaces to try to figure out how you inference at the device level and then offload all this stuff to the cloud somehow? Are you seeing any interesting M&A activity around these big companies? If so, which companies are fueling the most activity from what you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think there's a general recognition after the Gartner report came out that said, 75% of enterprise generated data was going to be created and processed outside of the data center, right? So there's this knowledge that we're going to have to aggregate, that information in some way and process it. And, so we're seeing companies that have acquired in this space, like Microsoft and Apple and Equinix, and they're trying to, I think, get as much coverage for those devices as possible so that they can start to build that aggregation layer. What we're seeing on the investment side is that, companies that are in, verticals that are, propositioning themselves really as, the software layer is important. And not, to Jack's point, they're not sort of, a Swiss Army knife of I can do this for everyone at all times. The specific problem that you're solving tends to get a higher level of investment. And so, go and do one thing and do it really well. And have yourself open from an API perspective, from some sort of standards perspective. I think you're going to have a much easier time sort of navigating, fundraising, where you can start to look at the hardware costs as really being just a blip on the cog line. And that you're going deep within that sector and that sort of vertical. So that seems to be where we're getting more resonance on both the investment and the exit side that we've seen.
That's an interesting aspect, Tricia, because this notion of hardware as a service, everyone wants to move up the value chain and get the recurring revenue from the data that's mined, from the analytics of that data. And so, there'll be incredible innovation on sensors and tiny ML things, but okay, how do you really make money? Which comes back to what value and where is it in the value chain that you're participating?
Richard, you've been involved a lot with Silicon Catalyst Incubator and the Silicon Catalyst Angel Investment Groups, both focused on early stage chip companies. What are you seeing in terms of what the early stage chip companies are doing in industrial IoT and where they're trying to make their mark? What's kind of interesting there?
Well, as I said, we have a couple of companies that are operating on the edge that are doing the inferencing, in-memory inferencing. So it comes back to turnaround time, to latency aspects. The other end of the spectrum is just the infrastructure, because at the end of the day, I joke, how many people have 4K video in their monitors in their cars? What's next is 8K video. Those TVs are already on the market, and there'll be a lot more. And so people are just going to be insatiable appetite for bandwidth. And so, it goes from the edge all the way to the cloud. And so every kind of possible data center server that we might see in our portfolio, all the way down to sensor companies or communication companies.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot since we're talking about what's hot. Any interesting companies you think we should take a look at for the audience members who might be
Well,
researching this space?
I'm probably going to upset some people, so I'll punt on that one. But just to say that, you know, at the end of the day, it's the business model is really what's going to make the uniqueness in the market from an investor standpoint. And, you know, do you have that recurring revenue model? Even if you're giving away the chips, and I want to, you know, cost of goods is the chips, but gee, okay, no one wants to be just a chip company anymore. It's the data that's the gold. And so how am I going to be able to mine the gold and then go process the gold?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're seeing that even with the big guys, I think now. Jack, sorry.
So I will expand on what you say, Richard, and I don't know if that's what you were going to say, so I don't want to put words in your mouth. But you know, intelligent memory, I would call it this way, because there's all kind of confusion as to what kind of processing should be done there and how it's done and where. That's the key. So to give a perspective on data, it's predicted by 2025 that there will be 175 zettabytes of data generated per year. And of course, you know, even I'm a memory guy now, so I deal with that on a daily basis. I have no way of imagining what 175 zettabytes is. And actually, I think a zettabyte is the entire Library of Congress 70 million times. So it's just, you know, this amount of data is so large that it's nice collecting, but then you have to do something with it, and you can't just pipe everything, as Tricia was saying, more and more, it's going to be processed outside. On the processing, you know, I wanted to mention that there are 3 levels. So we're talking about cloud and we're talking about the intelligent sensors, but there is also a middle ground within the facility, which is this gateway, call it. And, you know, I think a really interesting proposition to be able to manage all that is to understand the entire end-to-end system, because otherwise you're going to have breakdown and things like that. And it's an immensely complex problem. So if you're developing intelligent sensor, you need to be partnering with companies doing gateway or cloud so that you can have the whole chain. But I think intelligent memories is a key area where you can be a lot more efficient. And, you know, unfortunately, you asked about semiconductor. I think it's coming back a little bit, but a lot of investors have shied away from that. And I can tell you that in the angel groups, at least the one that I'm involved with and that I follow, of course, you're, Richard, a little bit different in that you have that focus, which I think is nice, but a lot of angel groups are making very limited investment, if any, on the semiconductor side.
That's why we exist, Jack.
Yes.
I mean, the point is, you know, everyone ran to the other side of the boat because it was so much easier to do software, to get a software startup off the ground, which is why Silicon Catalyst exists. You know, you don't have to worry about raising that first $2 to $5 million. Let's go off and help you get to the next level with getting into the portfolio. So I guess, Lisa, I didn't answer your question, but I would encourage people to go to the Silicon Catalyst website. You can see all the bets that we've placed in the market, if you will, of companies that we've accepted in.
Well hedged, Richard.
Okay, thank you.
That's great.
Well, and I'll mention, I mean, just, you know, security. No one is spending a lot of time and thinking like what happens with all of these millions and billions of devices out there as, you know, kind of an open hole to the security that software can't necessarily fix. And, you know, I think there's definitely going to be, you know, a push on that in the next, you know, couple of years as well.
I think it's a great point, Tricia. I mean, I'm seeing a lot around people talking about security and not a whole lot of action in terms of really innovative companies addressing it. I think partially it seems because there are a lot of different types of technology being used, and it's still very piecemeal around industrial IoT. Have you seen anything kind of interesting that from a security perspective that you think is worth watching as we move into 2021? Companies,
You know, I've seen, companies try to, sort of retrofit and, come through and collect the sensor data, serve as a gateway, as a securitized gateway for those things. I've seen companies that will, completely update firmware, which is an interesting way to go about that. And, I think there's going to need to be some sort of, hardware savvy way to go and securitize this whole end-to-end network, right?
Yeah, and I think, thinking about security and sort of the intelligence that's required to continually update security. For example, you find a hole. How do you patch that hole? How do you take care of that? It can't just be Band-Aids on a broken leg the whole time. I guess what I'm kind of interested in is this area between security and also just intelligence in general, right? So when industrial IoT, presumably tons of different types of industrial IoT applications. The way that you handle so much data, to Jack and Richard's earlier comments, is really complicated. How you process that data and manage it is one thing, and then how you learn from that data and understand what's happening around security with that data is something else. Have any of you guys seen really interesting stuff happening on the sort of processing of data, the intelligence, the AI, if you will, of industrial IoT that's worth noting here?
Yeah, I mean, there's some companies doing software work in this area. I think it's by startups from what I see, it's somewhat challenging for them to get traction and lengthy, which is difficult for startup, but definitely well needed. I think the platforms being upgraded and this, that I see the AI chip companies, but quite frankly, AI is going to be embedded. So, I now see companies doing sensors and pretty much all the hardware is going to have AI embedded everywhere. And that's going to give a springboard to those software companies to be able to port their software. And so I think the two go together, AI and security, because that enables analysis and local processing, which is all help security, in addition to the standard security stuff, which have been done more and more in terms of creating some puff and special encrypted words and that you can use to protect the systems. So I can see that, I'd be fairly bullish that to see I would say in a couple of years when there is that inference engines for AI, which can also be repurposed to do computing to help with security. I would see that as a good springboard for a lot of software companies to be able to improve the security of those end nodes.
There's an interesting aspect, especially, I'm a hardware guy through and through. And so I view the world as everything's a nail when I have a hammer, right? And so the point is there's an enormous consolidation going on, further consolidation in the semiconductor industry. And so, if the old expression, I think silicon is the oxygen that allows software to breathe. I heard this at a RISC-V event. And you think about that and you say, all right, if all this consolidation is happening, where's the innovation going to come from to solve the security issue, to solve the data management issue, to solve the communication the scale of industrial IoT is so much different than the Wi-Fi at Starbucks, right? You think about this, and we've gotten used to just ubiquitous connectivity. But then you think about what's happened now in the US with the communities that don't have good internet service, don't have good Wi-Fi. There's the societal aspect of this technology growth, but more importantly, I come back to the consolidation, which maybe will inhibit some of the innovation at the hardware side, just because everyone's going to be so bottom line centric as opposed to top line centric.
Now, I'm just curious, guys, you think, Richard, you've mentioned some of this innovation. Do you think a lot of this is coming from, because industrial IoT has been historically so fragmented, are you still seeing a lot of this innovation coming from the smaller startups, or are you seeing that emanate from the larger chip companies, for example, or the larger ecosystem players who are just taking small teams and sort of devoting them to trying to solve some of these issues? Well,
standards always win, and there's such a legacy of Wi-Fi infrastructure. And so the IEEE created the 802.11ah to basically address all the shortcomings of Wi-Fi for the industrial space. I mean, you could hook up 8,000 sensors, tags to the radio technology. You have a range of over a kilometer. And so, there's a hardware solution. And now let's go service it to the industrial market. But a lot of those solutions historically have been proprietary. And so now as the shift to the standards-based, hopefully we'll see a lot more acceleration in the market in terms of deployments as well as follow-on software services that could sit on top of this.
Hey, Lisa.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Gears a little bit, because
Go ahead, Tricia.
I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. Oh, go ahead, Tricia. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So I was just going to say, I'm seeing the same things, Richard. I mean, so we have a buy-side client in the networking space that makes access points among other things, and they're looking at how do you get ruggedized? How do you get the security down? How do you manage through cement walls? How do you, all of the things, and all of the various protocols that these machines in industrial centers have been using for the last 30 years. And so it is a cacophony of old standards, new standards, problems that they didn't see, bandwidth issues, and that is in part, I think one of the issues around industrial IoT is, we talked about, Lisa, that it's fragmented, and that people haven't, Jack mentioned the standards, Richard mentioned the standards, people haven't gotten to this place where you can, adjudicate those signals in a way that works, on a continuous path for companies and enterprises that needed to be useful, right? And so I think we still have so much work on just the nuts and bolts of it, and securitizing it and hardening it, that there's lots of work to do there before we get to machine learning, and which is, I think, a wish down the road a little bit.
It's interesting, right? Because with all of this fragmentation, industry-wide fragmentation with industrial IoT, we also have the added complexity of the COVID-19 pandemic and what that brings for all of us cooperating and coordinating together, not only in our own companies, but across, many companies, right? And what we used to do all the time was go to conferences and try to meet people and chat and learn and share best practices or not. But that sort of changed this year. Looking at COVID-19 as it relates to what's hot and what's not in industrial IoT, can you guys comment a little bit about what you've seen change this year, not only with your own mindset, but just in general with the market around industrial IoT?
It's all about automation. I mean, at the end of the day, it's robotics, it's automation, it's intelligence that is not required to have human interaction. And so, even a year from now, hopefully we're out of the woods here with the pandemic, but still the whole notion of, will people feel comfortable going back to assembly lines? Will people feel comfortable in that elbow to elbow situation, as opposed to the innovation is going to come from robotics, from automation? Never mind the autonomous vehicle. What about the autonomous factory escalation of autonomy in the factory?
Are you seeing purchasers, in other words, big companies that would normally be the types to have robots on the floor, for example, in their warehouses or others, making faster moves than you've seen them make as a result of COVID-19?
Not yet.
I think we've certainly seen it with our customers, and so our clients who service a number of those customers, right, have said, people have been putting off decisions about automation and robotics, and now they've escalated those decisions. And so while they can't actually install anything because they can't get people into their warehouses, they are actually at least getting it through the purchasing decision. And we've got a couple of clients that have bookings for things that are in this space, but aren't actually able to recognize the revenue because they can't get in to install them. And so it seems like all of that has been delayed. But at the same time, that COVID accelerated, I think, the adoption of some of these technologies. And I think that'll be good for the whole ecosystem, because one of the questions asked by someone out in our audience, I talked about investors during COVID. And what we've seen is that investors still want to put capital in play. So whether that's at the venture level, certainly the private equity level, they're beating down people's doors trying to get more money in play right now, because the cost of capital is essentially zero. And the strategics are lagging a little bit behind that in terms of their, I think, both investments and acquisitions, because they're still getting through that. Okay, we handled the crisis, we took care of our people, we took care of our customers. Now we need to figure out, how do we operate like this, and what's the planning process for 2021? And so I think their decision-making process has been a little bit delayed, but there's certainly just a ton of capital out there to continue, innovation in this way.
Yeah, I see the same thing, and I'm maybe earlier than you, Tricia, on this. For startups right now, it's lots of interest, and we see it as people planning for more automation, and that goes one of the things we haven't discussed, which maybe not that glorious, but it's all the cleaning and all the safety measure around COVID. So robotics is starting to play into that. Asset tracking to track the equipment moving through the aisle is also part of that. And how do you do that indoor? I think that's part of the hot technology, to be able to combine all those wireless capabilities, because you don't have GPS, and to be able to do an accurate job at tracking those assets. So we see interest in all those vectors, but we don't see yet our young startups getting traction. And I think it's just the planning is being done and all that, but the actual move is not there. So that probably comes as a second wave, hopefully in 2021.
We've got a bunch of questions that have come in from the audience in the Zoom group chat. So I'd like to go over those since we've got a little bit less than 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that we try to move through these questions relatively quickly. There's a question from Bob Renard saying the vast majority of data on the network is video for entertainment and or apps to track users for advertising. How much of the GDP can be driven by advertising and entertainment?
That's a good question.
Well, for the industrial, yeah, I was going to say, for the industrial, it's while the workers are on break or when the robots have downtime. I guess I don't know where that might play into the industrial space.
So a couple of stats that we were finding as we were sort of canvassing the space AT&T's core network traffic increased by 22%, right? Online gaming increased by 75%. We're all clear on what we're doing here while we're stuck at home. 75% increase in online retail, 500% increase in telemedicine. And all of those things, have some level of extra data usage. So while it's probably not, directly, related to advertising, I definitely think that, we're going to see pops in, more gaming, more telemedicine, and some of those will last, which I think is good. But what it tells me is that the core networks are probably not ready for us to continue in this fashion. And on top of the massive data that's coming from industrial IoT, right?
Another question.
On advertising, it's an interesting proposition, and it's also a question of an evolving market. And are the big advertising companies considering that? I mean, yes, there's a traditional, get your whichever news network you listen to and have your advertising there. But you have so many pipes now. You could even consider, in an industrial environment, having some kind of advertising, but, mostly you have so many pipes and so many opportunities for doing advertising at a relatively low cost and maybe also a low return per user, but aggregated pretty good. And if the advertising companies, which some of them have so much money, can be able to fund startups, to be able to help them having better intelligent systems to dispatch this advertising different ways, I think that can have a good repercussion on the GDP.
Another question from Darren McDade. Can you elaborate on 802.11AH versus 802.11AF as a 1 kilometer IoT long range sensor communication solution direction?
Yeah, I guess maybe that's for me, since I've been waving the flag for Halo. I would, let's see, it's Darren, I would point to you and anyone else listening. Wi-Fi Alliance has published some great white papers back in May and June on the protocol, on the new standard. And it really is, someone I work with is quoted as it's the Goldilocks solution for industrial IoT wireless communication. It has the range, it has the bandwidth for digital twin support, and it has the security. It has WPA3 security built in. And it's upward compatible. It's directly compatible with the stack there in the Wi-Fi handling. So I guess instead of going down into the details here, Lisa, I guess I would put Darren in touch. I guess I'd be glad to talk to him if he's available, or just I point people towards the Wi-Fi Alliance white papers.
Great. Another question from Darren regarding security. Are you concerned that the, say, ARM trust zones, bootloader OOTA, and application loading security will be prone to wide-scale disruption?
That sounds like a chip question, Jack. I don't know, you or me?
Yeah. Well, so there are two things I was going to say earlier, and I won't comment more on that, but I think an interesting thing I haven't seen, but certainly would be popular these days, is how to track the security of the hardware you're installing. So you're installing hardware for security, and that's been the big debate on 5G, of course, is how can we trust whoever does our 5G base station that they're not going to cipher the data. So whoever has a good software or certified chip that's going to investigate and find out, is the hardware leaking something, or the pipe, that would be pretty hot. But I would say security is all about not one thing, right? Meaning, yes, whatever you can do, you got to do it great and protect this, but that's going to be broken very quickly. So it's all about layers. And that's the complexity. Where do you stop? Almost never stop. So it's an ongoing business. So the ARM stuff and the trust zone, it's one thing. If someone looks at it and say, that's it, that's my security, I'm just going to do that and I'm done, they're probably not going to have a very secured system. It's going to be helpful, but it's not a very secured system. So you have to consider a multitude of solutions that are going to make your system robust.
So we have a couple of minutes left. And I think that there don't seem to be any additional questions from the audience. If there are any other questions, feel free to type them in and I'm happy to throw them out there. But I wanted to thank the WCA for having this panel today, and let the panelists leave with any parting thoughts about things that we should check out that are really cool and interesting. What you think we should be looking towards in 2021. Tricia?
I think we're going to see a big uptick in work from home device connections technology. How do you basically control the problems with human error in connecting back to the enterprise? And so, I think that's definitely going to be, on the agenda for a number of companies. We've got, a bunch of free industry reports on our website. If you want to look more into this around, networking, infrastructure, edge. And I think our industrial IoT, if it's not up now, it will be within the next couple of weeks. So thank you.
Folks, I've seen a preview of that one and it's actually really, really interesting. So do check that out when it's available. Anybody else? Richard, Jack?
I just come back to the continued consolidation. I mean, the good news is we go through business cycles within the semiconductor industry. And as we're going to see even into 2021, we'll see further consolidation. And so that potentially leaves people on the street as the organizations try to optimize their OpEx. And which could spring out to a whole bunch of new interesting innovators that want to go solve some problems. And today the semiconductor companies are CFO driven for the most part. And so now you say, all right, once they do their scaling back, what do those people with really incredible creative concepts go do and go build something new? So I think you're going to see a lot more in 2021 of innovation based on early stage companies, and it won't be coming from the large existing players as much as it will be from the entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out for startup companies is that there is a little bit of a dilemma right now. The pipe is somewhat broken, in that it's relatively easy, especially if you're in a good location like Silicon Valley, to get initial funding, right? To get a few $1 million is not so difficult. And then, the traditional model is then you get to a VC and a Series A. And now what has happened, actually prior to COVID and then accelerated with COVID, is that the Series A guys that, we work with them, and they started with a $50 million fund, and it's like, okay, it's not enough, we need to make bigger bets. So then they went $80–100 million, and now that's still a small Series A fund. And so it's more like $150–300 million. And at that point, well, I really cannot afford to invest $1 million or $2 million. I got to invest a lot. And therefore, I'm going to invest in something that's more mature. With COVID, this been kind of accelerated even more, because they're like, okay, I need to reserve some dollars for my companies so I can make sure that they can sustain. As a result, you can see if in the curve, there is a gap between the early stage and then Series A. And that's something that, that we need to look at. Now, in terms of technology, I would say I'm excited about robotics. I think people will accept it more and more now with COVID. That's a good trend. I think we got to look at storage. It's, you know, how to be efficient, and there are two monster companies, of course, in the storage area, but you know, I think more and more innovation coming from that would be immensely helpful. I think there is a focus already on AI and AI everywhere and computing, so that gets attention, but the storage has to work with it. You got to realize that in a chip or in a hardware, storage is probably 60, sometimes 70% of the overall hardware size, as well as power dissipation. So that's an area that needs to progress over time, and we're working off legacy technologies. Limited innovation has made it in production at this time.
Thank you, guys. We had one more question that came in. Tricia, Richard, Jack, do you just have a couple more minutes so we could ask one more question, or do any of you have to drop?
Yep.
Great. So last question comes again from Darren. He says, well, with a third bite of the apple, China has just launched the world's first 6G satellite. What impact do you see 6G having in the market as we roll out 5G? I know, a big question for the last one.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm working on 7G myself. Yeah, it's, you know, the question is even on 4G, are people using the full bandwidth of it? So I think the efficiency and being able to get the capability out of the standard is already a big thing, because you could be sitting on a 5G pipe and just tapping on a small fraction of what it's capable. So I would say focusing more on getting the usability and the efficiency out of the pipe is probably a better commercial proposition at this time.
I think if you want to learn all about it, you go to Jeremy's 6G conference here in a couple of months as part of WCA. So
great advice, Tricia.
Great plug, Tricia.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
So I guess we're hitting a little bit overtime here, and this has been a great discussion. I should probably just wrap up with a few things, but if you guys want to continue the discussion, we can do that. I do have one question. We talked about all of these edge computing, wireless connectivity, and data, but all of this stuff needs power, and a lot of these sensors are remote. So do you guys have any thoughts about energy harvesting, wireless power, how this is all playing in? What are the trends? Are you guys making bets there? Just things along those lines. Could you guys just comment on that quickly?
Yeah, I'll put a plug in for one of the companies in our incubator, which specific to that question, which is Tramido, is working on a multiple source energy harvesting technology. And it's a very interesting, especially as it might be attached to a tiny ML environment. So,
okay, thanks.
So I probably made all the other companies in our portfolio upset, but there we go, Tramido out of UK Wales.
How do you spell it, Richard?
Trameto. Actually, I think Jeremy, Davies was on the your event last month, I think.
Yeah, they were in the last event.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
great.
definitely good point, Jeremy, in terms of being able to harvest power out of sensors that can work off solar or even light, for low power applications. And of course, going along with that, ultra low power hardware, which requires power management as well as a good memory.
Right.
and battery technology. Battery technology has been pretty challenging. You know, we've worked on startups. I think there's, you know, also good areas for startups in battery technology, both in terms of larger batteries or more efficient battery, as well as battery security, right? Because they're, you know, one of the startups we saw recently working on being able to flag ahead of time, even if it's tens of seconds, if there's got to be a failure and potentially a dangerous situation for the battery.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
With that, thank you guys all for being on our panel today. Tricia, Richard, Jack, and Jeremy and team, thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. We enjoyed it.
Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
And thank you for
Thanks,
everyone online who's attended. This is definitely a first for this particular WCA event, and we appreciate you being here.
Thanks everyone. Again, appreciate participants and the audience. We just want to remind you of a couple of or 3 upcoming events. As Tricia mentioned, put in a great plug for the 6G event coming in February. So please join that. But we also have events relating to COVID era for moving people and things safely kind of in December. I think it's mid-December. Check WCA.org for that. And then in January, we have another flagship event called Spectrum. So I thank you. And we're going to end up with some music from the Midnight Ramblers.
Thank you.
So Andy, go ahead.
I think it was a good event here, what you did. Thank you very much for everybody on the panel and also the audience.
He wear no shoe shines, got toe jam football, got ball get finger shoe, Coca-Cola. He said, I know you, and you know me. One thing I can tell you is you got to be free. Come together.
Maybe perhaps you can say some words how we can book
Okay,
some special events. Would like to have you on our Christmas party, which we cannot do this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's for some reason I didn't share, but
Okay, everybody, thank you so much. People are leaving the floor. Thanks again, Lisa, Tricia, and Jeremy, of course, and see you next month again, hopefully, on the 16th of December for the next event. Otherwise, you get our emails. Keep informed, keep in touch, keep safe. If you have any question, ping us at wca.org. Thank you again. And talk to you soon offline if you wish. Shoot me an email, shoot Jeremy an email, and everybody else. Take care, stay safe. See you next time.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah,
Thanks,
bye-bye.
Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you.